When I started off in HR in 2005, I had these huge ambitions that I'll be part of corporate for a couple of years, and then I'm going to leave it all there and go work for an NGO and change the world. So I still remember that was my plan in 2005. And I had told myself, 2010, I'm going to be out of corporate and work in an NGO. Come 2010, I was still enjoying what I was doing. I told myself maybe 10 years, maybe in 2015, I'm going to leave everything. And now it's, 16 years since then, I'm still part of the corporate world. But I think when I went through purpose workshops, I had this huge penny drop moment where it made me realize that I don't have to be outside the system of corporate to do good. If that's something that drives me, making a difference, doing something that adds value, etc., I realized that I could do that by being part of Unilever.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Shruti. And I've practiced, but I hope I get it correct. Ganeriwala. Is that right? Great. Well, Shruti is part of the HR team at Unilever here in Australia, and I'm really glad that you've made some time to speak with us today. How are you, Shruti?
I'm very good. Thanks, Lawrence. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. And where are you today?
I'm based in Sydney. So talking to you from Sydney today.
Wonderful. And for people who are not familiar with you and your work, I'd love you to, first of all, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to be HR director at Unilever? What is your story?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lawrence. I'm Shruti. I am the HR director for our foods and refreshments business here in Australia and New Zealand. Been in Unilever Australia for about 7 years, and before this was in Unilever India for about 5-6 years. So broadly about 16 years plus of HR experience across India, Australia, most of it with Unilever and some snippets here and there with other organizations. So that's a little bit about me. Like most people who've spent this much time in HR have done a variety of roles, from HR business partnering to talent to learning, a lot of different roles. But my deep passion lies in, well-being, diversity, equity, inclusion, and, making that an integrated part of everything we do in an organization. So that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. That's a little bit about me.
Thank you. So why don't we jump straight in and talk about well-being, which is your favorite topic, my favorite topic. And given you've spent quite a long time now at Unilever and you've seen the same organization, but from two different lenses, I'd imagine it would be different from the Indian perspective versus the Australian perspective. But I'd love to understand how Unilever's approach, and we all have a perception of Unilever being such a big company, but I'd love the inside track. How has well-being changed over the years, over the time that you've been there?
Thanks, Lawrence. That's a great question. So I think one of the things that has been a constant at Unilever is the fact that well-being, HR, inclusion, all of these are an integrated part of our business strategy. So in Unilever globally, we've got our Compass strategy, which is built across 3 pillars, which is around brands with purpose grow, companies with purpose last, and people with purpose thrive. So at Unilever, we've got this huge belief that these are the 3 important pillars. And as you see, that people with purpose thrive is a core part of the strategy. And that's where all our work on well-being, inclusion, and all those different areas come in. So that's been something that's been consistent at Unilever for a while. When it comes to well-being, I think the cool thing is that we look across the entire spectrum. So we look across 4 different pillars of well-being: physical, mental, emotional, and purposeful. So that's how we define well-being across 4 different pillars. And then, there are times that one is more important than the other. When COVID happened, mental health, mental well-being, etc., became hugely important. But we try to work across all of these 4 pillars, whether it's, with mental health or physical health. Also, a lot of work which in the space of purpose. So that, I think, is something that I love what we do at Unilever, is the focus on helping people identify their purpose. That's something, Unilever globally runs these workshops, asking all their employees to take time out of work and to spend time on identifying their purpose. That's something I have done personally myself and got a huge value out of. So that's a little bit about how we do well-being at Unilever.
I was just going to ask a little bit more about purpose, because I think that's a very interesting point, because what you often see, and physical, mental, emotional, you see those in most organizations in terms of pillars of well-being, but the purpose one is different, and there has been this big, I guess, trend of shifting. So for people, and we see it more now, that people are very keen to work for organizations where their personal values are aligned with the organizational values. But it sounds like Unilever's been ahead of the curve and actually proactively helps, because often people, and I speak to lots of people as a coach, they're not clear on what their purpose is. They're not clear on what their values are. I mean, with some help, it's definitely there, but they need some help. So I'd love to understand what Unilever does with their employees, and whether that program about finding your purpose is open to all employees, because you have a lot of people working in so many different functions.
It's a great question, Lawrence. I'll tell you a little bit about what we do with our purpose work and the purpose workshops, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my own story on how that has helped me. So I think first off, it's open to all employees. So we encourage all our employees to go through a purpose workshop. It's a specially designed workshop where we take people out of their work context and work through a series of things, from thinking about your child, like a typical facilitated workshop, from your childhood to your happy memories, to things that drive you, to things that pull you down, etc. So we do a series of work around that. The ambition is that you leave that end of the day with some clarity on what your purpose is, and that has to be purpose of you as an individual, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be purpose of me at Unilever. So it's purpose of for Shruti. So that's the kind of work we do at Unilever. We've been doing that for many years now, and it's been received really well by employees. I'll tell you a little bit about my own journey on finding purpose. So maybe going back a little bit, like I said, I've got 16 years of experience in HR. When I started off in HR in 2005, I had these huge ambitions that I'll be part of corporate for a couple of years, and then I'm going to leave it all there and go work for an NGO and change the world. So I still remember that was my plan in 2005, and I had told myself, 2010, I'm going to be out of corporate and work in an NGO. Come 2010, I was still enjoying what I was doing. I told myself, maybe 10 years, maybe in 2015, I'm going to leave everything. And now it's, 16 years since then, I'm still part of the corporate world. But I think when I went through purpose workshops, I had this huge penny drop moment where it made me realize that I don't have to be outside the system of corporate to do good. If that's something that drives me, making a difference, doing something that adds value, etc., I realized that I could do that by being part of Unilever. And that's where a lot of my passion for well-being and D&I and everything comes in. And today, my purpose, as I've articulated it to myself, and it's dynamic and it keeps changing all the time as I think about different things, but at the moment, my purpose is to create small moments of joy. So that's how I've articulated my purpose. And, I try to do that across different things. I try to do that in the bigger picture across the work that I do with, am I making a difference? Am I creating moments of joy for the people that I serve or work with? And then also in small things, right? Like in any interaction that I have, I love bringing some energy, some cheer. If you get to know me better, you'll know that I love talking a lot. So I try to bring a little bit of joy to everything that I do. So that's a little bit about my story.
I love that. And that purpose, like your purpose is, and I think many of us relate to what you said, and it's very interesting in terms of your beliefs when you first join a company, when you're at the beginning of your career, to where you are now, and you look back, and it's interesting that you can have a positive impact within the corporate. I think often when we're younger, we feel we need to be outside the system to be able to make a difference, but often within the system is where you can have the biggest impact. And I really love your purpose, because it's something that you can experience every day. So every day you can feel, yes, I'm on purpose, which is wonderful. Okay, let's move on, because one of the things that we've spoken about previously is about bringing your whole self to work. And we hear that a lot within the wellbeing at work world, and a lot of people say that. And I guess, and it's a bit like company values, sometimes those company values can be a documentation exercise, if you like, that people spend a lot of time doing the work, and then they appear in corporate presentations, but on a day-to-day basis, they may not drive our behavior. With the whole person philosophy that I know Unilever has, and you have, how does how does that manifest itself within a workplace? I'd love to understand how it impacts the culture.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lawrence. I think the work that we've been doing at Unilever, and one of our fundamental beliefs is that we can be a great organization and make this an awesome place to work, etc., only if we create a sense of belonging for people. Only if it's an organization where people can bring their whole selves to work. And we have this huge belief that to create that sense of belonging, we need to work across different pillars of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love this quote that I read somewhere, which says, diversity is like being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And probably you heard that inclusion is being asked to dance. And someone made an addition to it the other day, and they said, equity is playing the music that everyone can dance to. So I love this quote because it really well explains the work you should be doing, right? Like, many organizations focus on the diversity pillar, which is great. We also do a lot of work in that, having demographic diversity. So whether we have people, gender balance, ethnicity, etc., but also cognitive diversity, diversity of thinking, etc. So we do a lot of work in diversity. And a lot of organizations also work in the space of inclusion. Are we creating a culture where, you can bring your whole selves to work? What are the kind of conversations we are having? What is the, behavior that our leaders are reflecting, etc.? But over the last few years, we've also started doing a lot of work in equity and this fundamental belief that equity is different from equality, right? Because equity is all about creating that level playing field. And, that's where a lot of work has come in on removing any barriers that we might have in recruitment or upskilling our leaders and making them aware of any unconscious bias that they may have, etc. So that's the kind of work we've been doing in this space. And, one of my personal, I'm really, I love the space of inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, etc. One of my personal learnings has been that one, this cannot operate in silo, right? Like this cannot be something that a D&I team is doing separately. It is so interconnected with all the work that we are doing in well-being or HR or integrated into the business strategy. So that's the kind of work we've been doing. Within D&I, we've got 4 big pillars of focus. So we've got, and these are in line with global Unilever priorities, which is gender diversity, LGBTQI plus inclusion, indigenous inclusion, and disability inclusion. So these are our 4 pillars. So this is where we focus, but then also focus on a lot of intersectionality across these different pillars.
So do you see diversity, inclusion, and equity as part of a well-being strategy? Is that how you would see it, or do you see the two as separate?
Oh, 100%. So what we do is, so I can give you an example of what we do at Unilever Australia and New Zealand. So we've got our business strategy. One of the pillars of that strategy is making Unilever ANZ an awesome place to work. So that's one of our pillars of our business strategy that our CEO chairs and champions. Within that awesome place to work strategy is where all the HR and well-being and D&I, etc. work comes in. And there is so much overlap across the two. So I absolutely see it as interconnected.
So it all kind of comes back, bubbles up to that one big purpose. Is Unilever an awesome place to work? Well, if it has if it's inclusive, if it's, it creates a culture of belonging, really looks after its people. Okay. And how do you measure, how do you track whether the corporate initiatives are having an impact amongst the people?
Yeah, good question. I think that's always an interesting one. We've got some input measures and some output measures. Like we, of course, still have the discipline of tracking, our gender diversity across different levels, ensuring, whether we have gender diversity in leadership teams. So I think one of the biggest things to do is sometimes we look at metrics at an overarching level. At an overarching, we are a 50-50 gender diverse organization. But when you look deep into the data, you will realize in some pockets you have that diversity, in some pockets you don't. And therefore, that gives you insights into what you need to do differently in those pockets. So there's a lot of tracking of input measures, internal tracking of whether gender diversity, whether it comes to hiring people with disabilities, etc. And then there's a lot of measures around culture. So, we've got our own employee engagement surveys where we ask people on whether there's a culture of psychological safety. Do they think that their leaders, stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion? So we've got some measures like that. And then the other thing is, of course, we can do a lot internally, but then there are lots of external things. Like we now have received a citation from Workplace Gender Equality Agency for a few years now for being an employer of choice for gender equality. So there are some external measures also that. So there are internal measures, there are external measures, and we try to find a balance between the two.
Oh, wonderful. So over the last couple of years, has the wellbeing strategy that you described, has that changed a lot because of the context that we're all living through? And has Unilever been impacted in a big way by the pandemic? I'm assuming yes, as we've all been impacted, but some industries more so than others.
100%. I think one of the things with these things is, as you mature as an organization, as the demands of talent keep changing, as the world keeps changing, etc., all of your strategies keep evolving and should keep evolving. One thing that we've started doing differently in well-being is, for many years, we were talking a lot about, what are we doing, what's our well-being calendar, what are the events we are running, what yoga sessions, meditation sessions, team events, etc. are we running. Over a couple of years, we had a realization that was only if I put it loosely, that to a certain extent was only solving for the symptoms, right? If people say that they don't have great well-being, okay, fine, go and do a mindfulness session. There's a place for that. There is a definite place for that. But I think we also realize that we also need to work towards the root causes. If people are telling us that, I'm overwhelmed with work, then what do we do differently? And that's where we've now, over the last few years, have started doing a lot of work in, the fundamental way our work is designed. We are leading some experiments on 4-day week in our New Zealand business. We have started doing a lot of work with our employees on how do you prioritize better? How do you manage your workload better? How can we as a business and as leaders be clearer of what are the biggest priorities and only work on areas that are delivering the business priorities. So, that's something that we've been doing a lot of, using agile methodologies, helping teams prioritize things on effort and value matrix, only do things that are delivering the highest value, etc. So that is also, again, this is very interesting because you could say this is one part of the HR strategy, which is all about agile and things, but it's so closely integrated with well-being. Because we've said we need to make a difference in the fundamental way people work for it to impact their well-being.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And again, it bubbles up into that big goal, making Unilever a great place to work, because fundamentally you can do all of the things around the edges, but if the job is not designed in a way which allows someone to do that work, and people are struggling with with overwhelm and all the issues that we see, then of course the well-being is going to be impacted. Thank you for sharing that. What about the future? So as we, so I guess the way I see it, and certainly what we see with the Wellbeing at Work lens, is that the last couple of years, the pandemic has been a catalyst, if you like. It's kind of shaken everything up. It's highlighted the importance of well-being, whole person well-being. We hear that a lot, but particularly mental well-being, and we realize that everything impacts mental well-being, and particularly the work we do is increasingly with our minds rather than with our bodies. So if people are not feeling mentally well and mentally resilient, then of course their performance will be impacted. But I'd love to understand what Unilever is focused on now from a well-being strategy point of view. What are there any initiatives that you can share with us that give us a view into how the world will look from Unilever, given the change that we've gone through, and we haven't come through the other side, but we know the world is going to be a hybrid world of some description, and people are going to be working wherever they choose to work within the boundaries that are set. But that is enormously liberating in many ways, because it frees people up to live and work anywhere. But of course, there's always a downside, and the downside is, well, how do you manage? How do we know if people are performing? There's a lot of challenges around that. So I'd love to understand the areas that you are focused on within your division, or more broadly within the Unilever business.
Great question, right? Because these are the conversations we are having every day, and it's one of the learnings, right? Like, there are a few things we are doing and experimenting, but we also have to remember to stay dynamic and keep changing as things change. But I can talk to you a little bit about a couple of things that we are doing or experimenting at Unilever. One is, like you also referenced, like the ways of working, flexible work, hybrid work, etc. at Unilever, what's been really cool is that we believed in flexible working for a long time. So we've had policies around flexible working. We measure you on output, not on the number of hours you spend, etc. So that was always in place, which was a great base for us when we went into all this work from home model, etc. However, we've now, with the changing times and everything, we've redefined our model, and we've come up with a hybrid work model where, it's been debated long and hard, and there are companies globally and locally in Unilever. And there are some companies that have gone out there and said, we need you to come back to office 100% of the time. But there are companies that have gone out there and said 100% of the time you can work from home. So, choose to stay wherever you want to. Unilever has debated this a lot, and we've consciously taken a hybrid approach in between. And where we've said to our employees that we expect you to be in office, obviously when things are normal. Currently, in Sydney, we're all again working from home with the pandemic taking off again. But when the government regulations say you can go back to office, the guideline we've given to our employees is that we expect you to be in office 40% of the time, because it comes from this fundamental belief that there is so much power that comes from working in teams, from collaboration, culture building, etc., being back in office. So we've sort of called it a 2+2+1 return to work model, where we've said 2 days we would like you to be in office because that's important for culture, collaboration, etc. 2 days, if you so choose, you can absolutely work from home, because we've also realized during the pandemic that working from home is all about focus and productivity and getting things done. We all know how much that has helped. And we've said one is flexible wherever you choose to work from. So that's a little bit the approach that we've taken, with the belief that we need to find something that works for everyone. And like we said, the other belief that we have is that this will keep changing, right? Like this is what we believe right now. As things change, as the demands change, this will keep changing. So that's one of the things. Yeah. Sorry,
I just said you've got to be adaptable.
100%. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. The other thing when it comes to, well-being or future of work experiments, etc., that we're doing is our New Zealand business is trialing a 4-day week, which is really cool, which is an interesting experiment also globally for Unilever, where, we are trialing 4-day week, which is basically built on the premise that you work 80% of the time, but you get 100% pay and you deliver 100% productivity. So built on that premise, they are trialing a 4-day week, which is an ongoing trial. They've been doing that for a year. It goes on for another couple of months, at the end of which we know, how it's gone. But the early results are really encouraging. Their business results are amazing. Their well-being scores report, in our own internal employee engagement surveys are amazing. Employees have self-reported productivity has gone up by 16%, job satisfaction's gone up by 18%, and so on. So that's a really cool experiment, which all of us at Unilever are watching very closely.
Wow, that's really interesting. I heard another company who did a similar thing, and they had very similar results. And one of the other benefits that they saw was that wider impact on the community, because people had more time with their families and they had more time for community projects. So ultimately, it was win-win-win. Everyone won. So it's great that you're experimenting with that. It'd be very interesting to see how that works. And is that for everyone's role? So because just in terms of the types of roles that you have within, because you have people working in factories and you have people who are working in offices, so you've got quite a range of different people.
So it's interesting, we do, but our New Zealand business has no factory. So our New Zealand business is largely head office and field force. So it's about 70, 80 employees. It applies to everyone, but there's no manufacturing in New Zealand for us.
Okay.
So yes, that's a different world completely, right?
Yeah, how you actually manage that within some of these new flexible rules. Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but one question I always ask everybody is what you personally do. So this podcast is all about finding equilibrium, finding balance every day. And of course, as an HR leader, and that's certainly what we see, is that everyone's problem is your problem. You're making lots of big decisions, but making Unilever an awesome place to work, that comes down to you to lead the charge. And it feels a big responsibility. But what do you personally do to maintain your balance, maintain equilibrium, so that you can be, the best version of yourself when you're at work, and also when you're with your family and your friends?
Thank you. Okay, so what do I do to maintain equilibrium in everything I do? I think a couple of things. First, for me, it's really important that we've spoken a lot about purpose and everything. It's really important that I'm doing meaningful work. I'm doing work that I enjoy. So, every day I strive to find play and purpose in everything that I'm doing. I read this really interesting book called Prime to Perform by Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor, which talks about, how you've probably read it, how high levels of motivation are created when we can find play and purpose in everything that we're doing. Purpose we all know, but play as in, experimentation, creativity, doing something different. So for me, we all give so much part of our lives to work, right? We spend so much time working. So it's really important for me that I'm finding play and purpose in everything that I'm doing. So that's for me the first big bucket. The second big bucket for me is just managing my work through obsessive planning. I might be a bit more obsessive on that, but I've got, these yearly targets, and then they become quarterly, and then they become monthly, and then I have my to-do list at a weekly level, at a daily level, etc. So I manage my work through obsessive planning, and that's been one of my learning over the years, that if we allow, work can take up all the 24 hours, right? So it is so closely intermeshed with life and work. It can take up all the time, but for me, what's really worked well is just time boxing things in my diaries and managing my work through obsessive planning of my to-do lists. And I still do it old school with my pens and diaries and post-it notes and everything. And I love doing it that way. So that for me is really important, because that helps me plan and manage my work.
That's important. Sorry.
And finally, I think the last thing, like you also said, is just making sure we are finding the time to do what we love. So I am sure that I find time to, to have my book club conversations with my friends, because I love reading, or, to do my yoga, or to do Bollywood movie nights with my daughter, which I absolutely enjoy. So, just making sure that I'm finding the time to do all of those things. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
No, that's wonderful. Just one last question, just about the obsessive planning, because it's really interesting. But just to dig a little bit deeper. So how would you plan your day? So you say you time box. So are you planning your week, your month, your year in that kind of obsessive way, or does it come down to having a looser plan for longer time frames and more tighter planning for each specific day? How do you do that? I'm sure people would welcome your your insights.
It's exactly that. So I think I have a loose plan of priorities, let's say for the quarter, but for the month, I have a slightly tighter plan on these are the things that I need to do across different parts of my role. And then every Friday, I plan for the coming week. So every Friday, I plan that next week, these are the big things that I need to deliver. These are the big rocks that I need to deliver. And these are some of the operational niggly things that all of us have in our jobs that are still important to do. So I split it across what are my big rocks, what are the smaller operational things. So every Friday I plan it for the week, but then every evening before I log off, I plan it for the coming day. So I exactly know these are the things that I have to, like for today, after we finish this call, I know the 5-6 big things that I have to do. So that's how I plan it. The other thing related to that, which I found really useful, is just blocking time in my diary. So every morning, I almost have till 10:30 blocked in my calendar just to do my own work before meetings and life and everything else takes over. So I value that as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Shruti, and let me acknowledge you for the amazing work that you're doing now and have done over many years working for Unilever. Thank you for your time today and for sharing some really valuable insights. Where can people find out more about you personally and about the work that you're doing?
First off, thanks, Lawrence, for inviting me. I have really enjoyed this conversation and got a lot of energy out of this conversation. My LinkedIn, so I try to keep my LinkedIn updated with what we are doing. I'm not very good at it, but trying to get better at sharing more on social media and on my LinkedIn profile, and that's the place to go, I think.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and thank you everyone for your time and for your attention, and we will see you next time. You take care now.